Well, now Paul has just got done telling us in verse 1 that we are the prisoners of the Lord, that basically he's taken us captive so that whatever our external circumstances are, unless they're based upon willful disobedience, and even to some degree, even in that context, we find ourselves in the situation, whether it's by God's providence or just simply by your own foolish consequences. Nonetheless, God has put us in that place that we might learn the lessons of faith, that we might grow in our relationship. But where he goes next in the next verse is the part that really is the hardest part of living the Christian life. When he says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. In that statement, he really summed up what are going to be the greatest challenges that you're going to have to wrestle with on a day-to-day basis if you're truly a follower of Jesus Christ. Because first of all, being completely humble is so abstract to me because I don't think I've ever been completely humble. I find that the original sin of mankind, if we go before mankind, the original sin of Satan was pride. He said, I'll exalt myself to the throne of God. Eve, he said, you will become like God. And it's that prideful exaltation to think that we could ever in any way rise up to a level of divinity is the highest form of arrogance that we can possibly express. And so what we have to understand is that what's native to my nature is pride, not humility. So that if I walk in humility, that's a grace that God has given me, an ability to see myself correctly. Because where humility comes in is when we realize that we're sinners. I mentioned to a friend one time, I said, I really struggle with pride. And that's an honest confession, I really do. And I can share that with you because you do too. But I really struggle with pride, I said to him. And he looked at me quite cleverly. He says, I have no concept why that's true. And essentially he says, really, if you knew me, if you knew yourself as I know you, you'd realize you have nothing to be proud of. And that's a simple reality, that humility is something when we see ourselves in right relationship with God. He is God and I am not. If I do something good, that's the moving of the Spirit of God in my life. If I do something bad, that's me. So that this idea of high self-esteem as being the ultimate goal and never having a critical view of ourselves and believing in ourselves and all that kind of nonsense that goes with the positive mental attitude stuff is really kind of a lot of fluff that will never stand up against the real hard issues of life. We need to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord that God can lift us up. But how do I do that? It's simply by beginning with confessing that I'm not naturally humble, that I take pride, and we ask God, reveal to me those proud things in my heart, those desires of self-exaltation. I think that one of the evidences or expressions of pride in our day today is the idea that everybody wants to be a celebrity. We want to have 1,000 followers on Facebook as if that amounts to something. We want to have, as Andy Warhol said, our 15 minutes of fame. We want to be recognized for how valuable, how important, how significant we are. It's really, as someone once said, it's a search for significance, but it's searching it in this world, in worldly measures, so that if you search it in outward appearance, you should realize that's not going to stay with you for very long. You're going to grow old and get ugly, and that's just the fact of gravity in our world. That your health and strength are going to diminish over time. Your intellect is going to maybe not be as quick. It may be deep, but it won't be fast. And you'll have to think things through. There's so many things that we find just living life that there's kind of this deteriorating effect, which is called death. And death is one of those things that brings humility. Old age brings humility, hopefully, because we recognize that we're not that important, that significant. And yet we live in a culture which wants to deny death, wants to deny aging and pretend like we don't age. People spend fortunes on doing things to keep themselves looking good or alter their appearance so it conforms to some kind of abstract concept of what beauty is, that which in itself is constantly changing. And we realize that there's no real humility on the inside. When you are humble, you see yourselves rightly. You see yourself accurately. You recognize that I don't deserve any of God's mercies, any of his kindness. I am a sinner through and through, and all I deserve, all I will ever earn by my works is hell. But God has so loved me based upon his nature, not something he sees in me. He doesn't look at me and say, oh, you're so lovable. God loves me because that's his nature. It's something that originates in him and is expressed towards me. It is not drawn out. I don't draw out God's love. God expresses his love to me that he might draw out of me humility and submission, where I place myself under him and I simply say, not my will be done, not what I want, but your will be done in my life. Not building my kingdom, but your kingdom. That otherwise I realize that I need to deny myself, pick up my cross, and follow him. And those are all terms of self-abasement, quite honestly. And this is a concept that's got lost in the church. We used to talk a lot about picking up your cross and following Christ, or bearing your cross. My cross that I have to bear is my own personality. Quite honestly, that's my cross I have to bear. My own selfishness, my own pride, my own ego. And he says, I need to pick that up and carry that by the grace of God, and realizing that that's something that I yearn for the day when I put off this sinful flesh and God gives me a new body like unto his that is pure and holy. Because when we even look at Jesus, it's interesting how in Zechariah 9:9 he prophesied the triumphal entry recorded in Matthew 21. And he said, behold, your king comes to you humbly and gently. So that what humility really manifests is gentleness. It manifests itself in patience towards other people. It manifests itself in forbearing love of other people. It's that kind of expression of kindness. We hear a lot of people saying, be kind. And I agree with that completely. But we have to ask ourselves, how do I go about being kind? But it's by recognizing the kindness that God has shown me and humbly accepting that I don't deserve that, but I have received that. And that when we're truly humble, we don't become angry, short, critical, judgmental, reactive. When I find myself doing those kind of things, like snapping at people and getting irritated, I'm in traffic, I think, what's the matter with you? Don't you know how to drive? Blah, blah, blah. That's not humility. That's pride, as if those people in that other car owe me something. The fact of the matter is, I need to walk in humility before God and just simply saying, God, have mercy upon that. Bless that person. Keep them safe because they're really going to need your covering today. But not becoming angry and resentful. That you become patient with other people. You become gentle with other people. And you put up with other people even when they're pretty hard to put up with. That's going to be a challenge that you and I are going to wrestle with the rest of our lives. Do not fall into the false impression that somehow you're going to achieve that and then you can move on to the next level of holiness. This will be ground zero for your entire Christian life. So when you're struggling with being patient with somebody, when you're struggling to forgive someone, when you're struggling to love somebody who's not lovable, that's a lifelong battle that you and I are going to have to fight. And we need to recognize that's also how we manifest the reality of Christ in our life. Because remember what Jesus said in John 13, men will know you're my disciples by your love one to another. Love is the expression of a humble heart. So this again becomes critical. It's ground zero. It's probably a passage we should read every day and remind ourselves of, because we'll never master it, but rather we can just surrender to the grace of God, which will give us mastery over our fleshly nature. Well, I'll continue on tomorrow as we look at verse 3. God bless you and go on his grace and continue to fight the good fight of faith.